The stars shimmered above the quiet colony outpost, their light barely touching the dense, shadowy forest surrounding the settlement. Jacob wiped his hands on a rag, his fingers still greasy from the engine he'd spent the day fixing. Life as a mechanic on an alien world wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. He preferred machines to people anyway. Machines didn't lie or disappoint. It was just another ordinary evening when she appeared. The knock on the door startled him. He wasn't expecting anyone. Most colonists didn't bother him unless something was broken. Jacob hesitated, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was late. Slowly, he opened the door. Standing there was a young woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was smooth and faintly blue, with a softness that made her seem almost delicate. Her long, silvery white hair flowed over her shoulders, and her large violet eyes shimmered with a quiet intensity. She wore a simple, flowing dress that moved gently in the evening breeze. "Are you Jacob?" she asked softly, her voice as calm as a whisper. He nodded, still trying to process her sudden appearance. "Yeah, that's me. Who's asking?" "I'm Lyra," she said, stepping closer. "I need your help." Jacob frowned. It wasn't unusual for someone to need his skills, but Lyra didn't look like any colonist he ever met. Her appearance, her grace, she was something else entirely. "What kind of help?" he asked cautiously. Lyra hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if she feared being followed. "I have an artifact," she said carefully. "It's broken, and no one I know can fix it, but I've heard humans are good with machines. Will you come with me? I'll explain everything." Jacob crossed his arms, suspicion tugging at the edge of his mind. He'd heard plenty of stories about strangers with mysterious requests, and they rarely ended well. But Lyra didn't seem threatening. If anything, she looked vulnerable. "Where is this artifact?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "At my home," Lyra said, her eyes pleading. "It's not far from here. Please, Jacob. I wouldn't ask if it weren't important." Her desperation felt genuine, and against his better judgment, Jacob found himself nodding. "All right," he said with a sigh. "Let me grab my tools." Lyra's face lit up with a relieved smile. "Thank you." As Jacob packed his bag, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far more complicated than a simple repair job. When he returned, Lyra was waiting patiently outside, her gaze scanning the forest as if searching for hidden dangers. "This way," she said, motioning for him to follow. The path she led him down was unfamiliar, winding deeper into the forest. The air grew cooler, and faint sounds of distant wildlife echoed through the trees. Jacob's grip tightened on his bag as unease settled in his chest. He didn't know much about Lyra or what she wanted, but something about the situation felt off. "Lyra," he said, breaking the silence, "why come to me? There are others in the colony who could help." She glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "Because you're the best," she said simply. "And I trust you." Her words caught him off guard. Trust wasn't something Jacob was used to hearing from strangers. He wasn't sure he believed her, but there was a sincerity in her voice that made it hard to doubt. As they walked, the forest opened up to reveal a clearing. In the center stood a shimmering crystalline structure, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was unlike anything Jacob had ever seen. "This is my home," Lyra said softly, leading him closer. Jacob stared at the structure, a mix of awe and unease swirling within him. Whatever he had just stepped into, he knew it was far from ordinary. Jacob's boots crunched against the soft forest floor as he followed Lyra toward the crystalline structure ahead. The closer they got, the more surreal it looked. The building seemed alive, its surface shimmering faintly as if reacting to the moonlight. Jacob tightened his grip on his tool bag. This was no ordinary home. Lyra walked gracefully, her silvery hair catching the faint glow of the structure. She didn't say much, but her silence didn't feel cold. It was more like she was lost in thought. Jacob's curiosity grew with every step, but so did his unease. "What is this place?" he finally asked, his voice breaking the quiet. "My home," Lyra said softly, glancing back at him. "It's old. Very old. It was built long before humans arrived on this planet." Jacob raised an eyebrow. He had heard rumors about ancient structures scattered across the galaxy, remnants of civilizations that vanished long ago. But seeing one up close was something else entirely. "And the artifact you mentioned," he pressed. "What does it do?" Lyra hesitated, her steps slowing as they reached the base of the structure. She turned to face him, her violet eyes meeting his. "It's hard to explain. You'll understand when you see it." Her vague answer didn't satisfy him, but before he could ask more, she gestured toward a doorway that seemed to melt open as they approached. The inside of the structure was even more otherworldly. The walls were smooth and crystalline, faintly reflecting their images as they walked. Soft, ambient light came from nowhere in particular, illuminating the space in a way that felt both calming and eerie. "This way," Lyra said, leading him down a hallway that twisted like the inside of a shell. Jacob followed, his mind racing with questions. What had he gotten himself into? And why did Lyra trust him, a stranger with something so clearly important? After a few moments, they entered a large, circular room. In the center was a pedestal holding a strange device. The artifact was about the size of a small suitcase, its surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with a soft light. Jacob couldn't tell if it was metal, glass, or something else entirely. "That's it?" he asked, setting his bag down and stepping closer. "Yes," Lyra said, her voice quieter now. "It hasn't worked in years. My people tried to repair it, but we couldn't. That's why I came to you." Jacob crouched down, examining the artifact without touching it. The patterns on its surface seemed to shift subtly, as if alive. He noticed small panels and connections that reminded him of human technology, but this was far more advanced. "What does it do?" he asked again, glancing up at her. Lyra hesitated, her hands clasping nervously in front of her. "It's a key," she said carefully, "but not for a door. It unlocks something ancient, something my people have guarded for generations." Jacob frowned. "And you need me to fix it because humans are different," Lyra admitted. "Your way of thinking, of solving problems, it's unique. I've seen humans repair things my people couldn't even understand. I hope you might be able to do the same." Her words carried a mix of admiration and desperation, but they didn't answer the most important question. Why him? Jacob didn't consider himself special, just a guy good with machines. Still, the challenge intrigued him. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll take a look, but no promises." Lyra smiled, a small but genuine expression that made her seem even more innocent. "Thank you, Jacob. I believe in you." He didn't reply, focusing instead on the artifact. As he began his work, using tools and techniques that felt crude compared to the sophistication of the device, he couldn't shake the feeling that this key was far more dangerous than Lyra let on. But for now, his curiosity outweighed his caution. Whatever secrets the artifact held, Jacob was determined to uncover them. Jacob knelt in front of the artifact, tools spread out beside him, his mind racing. Every groove and symbol on the device seemed alive, pulsing faintly as if it were breathing. It was unlike anything he had ever worked on before, but that only fueled his curiosity. As he examined the intricate surface, Lyra stood nearby, watching silently. Her delicate features betrayed a mix of hope and unease, as if she was as nervous about the artifact as she was eager for Jacob to fix it. "Did you say this thing is a key?" Jacob asked, his voice breaking the quiet. Lyra nodded but hesitated before speaking. "Yes, but it doesn't open a door the way you might think. It connects to something deep beneath this structure, something ancient." Jacob stopped and looked up at her. "Ancient, huh? Like what? A vault? A weapon?" Lyra's expression turned serious. "Not a weapon," she said quickly. At least I don't think so. It's more knowledge, power. My people have protected it for centuries, but no one has been able to access it since the artifact stopped working. Jacob leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. He had heard stories of ancient alien technology before, most of them ending with someone triggering something they shouldn't have. Still, he couldn't deny the pull of the mystery in front of him. "All right," he said with a shrug. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Using a small scanner, Jacob began analyzing the artifact. The device emitted faint energy readings, and the patterns on its surface reacted subtly to his movements, as if it were aware of him. He reached out carefully, pressing against what looked like a panel. The artifact hummed softly, and a section of it slid open, revealing a cluster of glowing filaments. Jacob stared in awe, the filaments emitting a soft, steady light that illuminated the room. "That's incredible," he muttered, leaning closer. Lyra moved beside him, her eyes wide. "I've never seen it do that before. What did you do?" Jacob glanced at her and smirked. "Just pressed a button. Sometimes it's the simplest things." Lyra looked at him, almost in disbelief. "We've studied it for years and never found that panel." "Well," Jacob said with a grin, "maybe your people weren't curious enough." As he studied the exposed filaments, Jacob noticed a small recessed slot that seemed to fit something specific. He frowned, tapping his chin. "Looks like it's missing a component, maybe a power source." Lyra's expression changed, and she looked away, her hands clasped tightly. "There is a power source," she said quietly, "but it's dangerous. That's why it was removed." "Dangerous how?" Jacob asked, his curiosity piqued. Lyra hesitated, then finally spoke. "The power source is alive. It's a symbiotic crystal connected to the artifact. If it's handled incorrectly, it could harm anyone near it." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "And you still want me to fix this thing?" Lyra met his gaze, her violet eyes steady. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The knowledge locked inside the structure could save my people. Without it, we may not survive the challenges ahead." Her word hung in the air, and Jacob felt the weight of her desperation. He didn't trust the situation entirely, but Lyra's sincerity was hard to ignore. "All right," he said, standing up. "Where's this crystal?" Lyra's face lit up with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "It's hidden in a secure chamber below. I can take you there, but we'll need to be careful. Others may not want us to succeed." "Others?" Jacob asked, narrowing his eyes. Lyra glanced toward the doorway, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are those among my people who believe the artifact should remain dormant. They fear what might happen if it's reactivated." Jacob sighed and grabbed his tools. "Of course, it's never simple, is it?" Lyra gave a small, apologetic smile. "Not when it comes to my people." As they prepared to venture deeper into the structure, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Jacob followed Lyra through the winding corridors of the crystalline structure, his senses on high alert. The soft hum of the walls and the faint glow of light bouncing off the polished surfaces created an atmosphere that felt alive, almost watchful. Lyra moved quickly but cautiously, glancing back at him every so often to ensure he was still there. Her nervousness was contagious, and Jacob tightened his grip on his tool bag. "This crystal," Jacob began, his voice low. "If it's as dangerous as you say, why didn't your people destroy it?" Lyra hesitated, her steps slowing slightly. "We can't destroy it. The crystal is unique. It's tied to the artifact in a way we don't fully understand. Separating them weakened both, but together they hold unimaginable potential." "Potential for what?" Jacob pressed. "To unlock the secrets of the ancients," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But not everyone believes we should." Before Jacob could respond, they arrived at a large circular door. Its surface was covered in the same intricate patterns as the artifact, but these pulsed faintly, as though sensing their presence. Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand on the center of the door. The patterns brightened and shifted, and with a low rumble, the door slid open. The room beyond was dimly lit, with a single pedestal at its center. Atop the pedestal sat the crystal. It was smaller than Jacob expected, about the size of a fist, but its brilliance was breathtaking. The crystal radiated a soft light, its surface shimmering with shifting colors that seemed alive, almost as if it were breathing. Jacob approached slowly, the air in the room feeling heavier with each step. "That's it?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. Lyra nodded, staying back near the door. "Be careful. The crystal reacts to emotions. If you're too aggressive or fearful, it may lash out." "Great," Jacob muttered. "No pressure." He reached out cautiously, his fingers hovering just above the crystal. The air around it felt warm, almost electric. Taking a deep breath, he gently picked it up. The moment his skin touched its surface, a wave of energy rippled through the room. The patterns on the walls glowed brighter, and the crystal pulsed in his hand. Jacob staggered slightly, but the energy didn't feel harmful. It felt curious. "It's like it's alive," he said, turning to Lyra. "It is," she replied softly. "The crystal is a sentient entity, though its thoughts are beyond our understanding." Jacob studied the crystal, its shifting colors mesmerizing. For a moment, he felt a strange connection, as if the crystal recognized him. Shaking off the odd sensation, he placed it carefully into a protective casing he had brought with him. "All right," he said, closing the case. "Now what?" Lyra stepped forward, her expression a mix of relief and urgency. "We take it back to the artifact. Once they're reunited, the artifact should activate." "Should," Jacob repeated, raising an eyebrow. Lyra gave a small, nervous smile. "It hasn't been done in centuries. There's always a risk." "Of course there is," Jacob said with a sigh. "Let's get this over with." As they retraced their steps back to the central chamber, the atmosphere in the structure seemed to change. The soft hum of the walls grew louder, more resonant, and the faint glow intensified. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Are we alone in here?" he asked, glancing at Lyra. "For now," she said, her voice tense. "But if anyone followed us—" Jacob didn't need her to finish the sentence. The stakes were rising, and he had a sinking feeling that they were running out of time. Whatever secrets this ancient structure held, it was clear that unlocking them would come at a cost. He just hoped it wouldn't be more than he was willing to pay. Jacob and Lyra entered the central chamber, the artifact waiting for them on its pedestal. The air felt heavier now, charged with an energy that Jacob couldn't quite explain. The soft hum of the crystalline walls seemed to grow louder, as though the entire structure was anticipating what was about to happen. Placing his tool bag down, Jacob carefully retrieved the protective case containing the crystal. Lyra watched him with a mixture of hope and fear, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Are you sure about this?" Jacob asked, holding up the case. "Once we start, there's no going back." Lyra nodded, her violet eyes steady. "I trust you, Jacob. This is the only way." With a deep breath, Jacob opened the case. The crystal's brilliance filled the room, its shifting colors casting shimmering reflections across the chamber. Carefully, he lifted the crystal and turned to the artifact. The slot he had discovered earlier seemed to pulse faintly, as if calling to its missing piece. "Here goes nothing," Jacob muttered, sliding the crystal into place. The moment the crystal connected, the artifact roared to life. A surge of energy shot through the room, and the intricate patterns on the artifact glowed with a dazzling light. The hum of the structure turned into a deep, resonant vibration, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Jacob stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the brightness. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted over the noise. "It's waking up," Lyra exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. "The artifact is reconnecting to the ancient network." The artifact began to emit a series of holographic symbols and projections, filling the air with shimmering images of star maps, diagrams, and streams of incomprehensible data. Jacob stared in amazement, his fear momentarily forgotten. "This is incredible," he said, stepping closer. It's downloading something." Lyra moved beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the projections. "These are the records of the ancients," she explained. "Their knowledge, their technology, everything they left behind." But before Jacob could respond, the artifact emitted a sharp, piercing tone. The projections flickered, and the glow of the crystal dimmed slightly. "That doesn't sound good," Jacob said, instinctively stepping back. Lyra's face paled. "Something's interfering." A sudden noise echoed through the chamber, a loud metallic clanging that sent chills down Jacob's spine. He turned toward the entrance, his heart pounding. "We're not alone," he said, his voice tense. Before Lyra could answer, figures emerged from the shadows. 3 tall, imposing individuals with pale blue skin and sharp angular features stepped into the chamber. Their armor gleamed under the artifact's light, and their expressions were cold and unyielding. "Lyra," one of them said, his voice filled with authority, "what have you done?" Lyra stepped forward, her shoulders squared. "I did what needed to be done, Kale. The artifact is active again." "You've betrayed our people," Kale snapped. "This knowledge is forbidden. You've risked everything by bringing the human here." Jacob raised his hands defensively. "Hey, I'm just the mechanic. Don't shoot the messenger." Cal's piercing gaze shifted to Jacob. "You shouldn't be here, human. Leave now, while you still can." Jacob glanced at Lyra, who stood her ground. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not until I finish what I started." Cal's expression darkened. "Then you've chosen your fate." The 3 figures advanced, their weapons humming with energy. Jacob quickly grabbed a wrench from his bag, knowing it was a poor match against their advanced technology. Beside him, Lyra's determination never wavered. "Jacob," she said, her voice steady, "trust me." Before he could respond, Lyra reached out and touched the artifact. It reacted instantly, the room filling with a powerful pulse of energy. The approaching figures froze, their weapons shorting out as the artifact's light intensified. Jacob stared at Lyra in disbelief. "What did you just do?" "I protected us," she said simply, "but it won't hold them for long. We need to finish this." As the artifact's light pulsed around them, Jacob realized there was no turning back. Whatever this ancient technology held, it was now their only hope, and their greatest danger. The artifact's light dimmed slightly, its holographic projection swirling chaotically, as if responding to the tension in the room. The 3 figures, temporarily immobilized by the artifact's pulse, began to recover, their movements slow but deliberate. Jacob's grip on the wrench tightened, his mind racing for a plan. Lyra stepped closer to him, her voice urgent but calm. "The artifact has a defense mechanism. If we can fully activate it, it will protect us." Jacob shot her a quick glance. "You could have mentioned that earlier." "There wasn't time." Lyra snapped, her gaze darting to the advancing figures. "I'll guide you, but you need to trust me." "Fine," Jacob muttered, dropping to his knees beside the artifact. "What do I do?" Lyra crouched beside him, her fingers tracing the glowing patterns on the artifact. "See these symbols? They're part of an activation sequence. You'll need to press them in the right order." Jacob stared at the shifting patterns, his frustration bubbling. "This looks like alien Sudoku. How am I supposed to figure this out?" "You're human," Lyra said simply, her tone almost reverent. "You see things differently than we do. That's why you're here." Taking a deep breath, Jacob studied the symbols. They pulsed in a rhythm, some glowing brighter than others. He focused, letting his instincts take over. Slowly, he pressed the first symbol, then another. The artifact responded with a low hum, and the projections began to stabilize. "You're doing it," Lyra said, a note of hope in her voice. But before Jacob could press the next symbol, Cal's voice cut through the chamber. "Stop this madness, Lyra. You don't know what you're unleashing." Jacob looked up to see Kale and his companions fully recovered, their weapons reactivating. Kel's expression was a mixture of anger and fear as he pointed his energy blade at them. "Get behind me," Jacob said, standing protectively in front of Lyra. Kel's cold gaze shifted to Jacob. "You're meddling in things beyond your understanding, human. Leave now, and you might live." "Funny," Jacob said, gripping his wrench tightly. "I was about to say the same thing to you." Kale raised his weapon, but before he could strike, the artifact emitted another powerful pulse. The walls of the chamber lit up with bright, shifting patterns, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the room in a language Jacob couldn't understand. Lyra's eyes widened. "It's the defense system. It's waking up." The chamber trembled as crystalline structures emerged from the walls, forming glowing barriers around Jacob and Lyra. Kale and his companions were thrown back by an invisible force, their weapons clattering to the ground. Jacob glanced at Lyra. "That's the defense system. I'm impressed." "It's not done yet," Lyra said, pointing to the artifact. "You need to finish the sequence." Jacob returned to the artifact, his fingers moving quickly over the symbols. The pattern seemed to guide him now, as if the artifact was helping him. With each press, the chamber grew brighter, the energy in the room building to a crescendo. Kale, struggling against the force holding him back, shouted, "You'll doom us all." "Lyra, stop this now." But Lyra's resolve didn't falter. "No, Kale. It's time we embraced the knowledge of the ancients. Hiding in fear has cost us too much." With one final press, Jacob completed the sequence. The artifact glowed brilliantly, and the entire chamber was engulfed in light. Jacob shielded his eyes, feeling a surge of energy ripple through him. When the light faded, the room was silent. The barriers around Jacob and Lyra dissolved, leaving them unharmed. Kale and his companions lay unconscious, their weapons shattered. Jacob exhaled, his heart pounding. What just happened? Lyra touched the artifact, her expression softening. The defense system neutralized the threat. The artifact is fully activated now. We've done it. Jacob looked at her, exhaustion and relief washing over him. What's next? Lyra smiled faintly. Now we discover the truth. Despite the quiet, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The room was still, except for the faint hum of the artifact, which now emitted a soft, steady glow. Jacob wiped the sweat from his forehead, his hands trembling slightly from the tension. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes fixed on the artifact, as if she were waiting for it to speak. "What now?" Jacob asked, his voice breaking the silence. Lyra stepped closer to the artifact, her fingers gently brushing its surface. "It's fully activated," she said softly. "The knowledge of the ancients is ready to be revealed." Jacob frowned. "And what does that mean exactly? Are we about to get a history lesson or unleash something dangerous?" Before Lyra could answer, the artifact began projecting a series of images into the air. Jacob watched in awe as scenes of star systems, massive structures, and beings unlike anything he had ever seen filled the chamber. The visuals were accompanied by a melodic hum, almost like a song, that resonated deep within him. Lyra's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "This is the legacy of the ancients. Their knowledge, their history, their warnings." Jacob stared at the images, trying to make sense of them. Warnings? About what? The projection shifted, showing a massive void swallowing entire planets. The hum turned ominous, and Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. "They called it the Devourer," Lyra explained, her tone somber. "An ancient force that consumed worlds. The ancients created this artifact to protect themselves, to harness their combined knowledge and power to fight back." Jacob's stomach tightened. "And you think it's still out there?" Lyra nodded, her expression grave. "We don't know, but the ancients left this knowledge for a reason. They wanted us to be prepared." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. "So this isn't just about your people. It's about everyone, every species. Lyra looked at him, her gaze steady. Yes, that's why I needed you, Jacob. Humans have a way of solving problems, of seeing things differently. I couldn't do this alone. Jacob exhaled, the weight of the situation sinking in. All right. So, what do we do with this knowledge? How do we use it? The artifact emitted another pulse of light, and a new projection appeared. It showed a star map with a specific location marked by a bright beacon. Lyra's eyes widened. That's the sanctuary. The sanctuary, Jacob repeated. It's where the ancients stored their most powerful tools. Lyra explained. Weapons, technology, everything they used to fight the Devourer. The artifact has given us the coordinates. Jacob stared at the projection. Let me guess, it's not going to be easy to get there. Lyra gave him a faint smile. Nothing worth doing ever is. Before they could plan their next move, a groan echoed through the chamber. Jacob turned to see Cal stirring, his companions beginning to recover as well. Their expressions were a mix of confusion and anger as they took in the glowing artifact and the projections around it. You don't understand what you've done, Cal said weakly, struggling to stand. This knowledge should have remained buried. Jacob stepped in front of Lyra, his wrench still in hand. If it was so dangerous, why didn't you destroy it? Cal's gaze hardened. Because the cost of using it is too great. The ancient's power comes with consequences. Maybe, Lyra said, stepping forward, but doing nothing is worse. We can't keep living in fear, Cal. This is our chance to protect not just ourselves, but everyone. Cal's expression softened slightly, but his posture remained defensive. You're playing with forces you don't understand. Jacob sighed. Yeah, well, welcome to my life. Lyra turned to Jacob, determination in her eyes. We need to leave. The sanctuary is our only hope. Jacob nodded, gripping his tool bag. Then let's go. But something tells me this is only the beginning. As they prepared to depart, the artifact pulsed one last time, its glow filling the room with an eerie light. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The air outside the crystalline structure was cooler, carrying the faint scent of the alien forest. Jacob tightened the straps of his tool bag as he followed Lyra down the dimly lit path. Behind them, the artifact's glow still shone faintly through the structure's walls, as if watching them leave. Cal trailed a few steps behind, his expression grim, but his weapon lowered. Though he didn't trust Jacob or fully agree with Lyra's plan, the star map projection had shaken something in him. He now seemed torn between his duty to protect his people and the looming threat the artifact had revealed. So, this sanctuary, Jacob began, breaking the tense silence. How far is it? And what's waiting for us there? Lyra glanced at him, her soft voice carrying a mix of determination and worry. It's on the other side of the forest, buried beneath a mountain. The ancients designed it to be nearly impossible to reach without the artifact's guidance. Nearly impossible, Jacob echoed with a wry smile. Great, I love a good challenge. Cal's sharp tone cut in. This isn't a joke, human. The sanctuary's defenses are likely still active, and if the artifact activates them incorrectly, it could destroy us all. Jacob turned to him, raising an eyebrow. Noted, but unless you've got a better plan, maybe save the doomsday speeches for later. Cal's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The group pressed on, the thick canopy above casting long shadows on the forest floor. The sounds of distant creatures echoed around them, adding to the unease in the air. As they walked, Lyra moved closer to Jacob. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? He asked, glancing at her. For helping me, she replied. You could have walked away at any point, but you didn't. Jacob shrugged, his voice lighter than he felt. I guess I've got a soft spot for impossible odds. Lyra smiled faintly, but her expression quickly grew serious. You've risked so much already. I won't let you face what's ahead alone. Jacob met her gaze, seeing the weight of responsibility in her eyes. "We'll figure it out," he said simply. "One step at a time." The group reached the base of a massive mountain as the first rays of dawn pierced the sky. The light revealed a jagged entrance partially hidden by thick vines and moss. It didn't look like much, but the faint hum of energy emanating from within told Jacob they were in the right place. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob set his bag down, his eyes scanning the entrance. "Any traps I should know about?" Lyra nodded. "The Ancients' defenses are designed to test those who try to enter. Only those deemed worthy can pass." "Worthy?" Jacob repeated. "Great. Another riddle." Cale stepped forward, his tone clipped. "If you fail, the sanctuary will consider us intruders. That won't end well." Jacob rolled his eyes. "No pressure, then." Lyra placed the artifact in a recess near the entrance. The moment it clicked into place, the ground trembled, and the vines receded, revealing a glowing pathway leading deep into the mountain. Jacob adjusted his bag and took a deep breath. "All right, let's see what your ancients have in store for us." The group moved cautiously into the passage, the glowing walls illuminating intricate carvings of long-forgotten battles and triumphs. The air grew colder, and the hum of energy grew louder with each step. Suddenly, the pathway split into 3 tunnels, each identical in appearance. Jacob stopped, his brow furrowing. "Let me guess, one of these is the right way, and the others lead to, I don't know, certain doom." Lyra examined the walls, her fingers tracing the carvings. "The artifact will guide us," she said confidently. As the artifact pulsed softly, one of the tunnels lit up, its glow inviting but eerie. Jacob exhaled. "Well, at least it's not leaving us to guess." Cal's voice was cold but steady. "Stay alert. The sanctuary's true tests begin now." Jacob tightened his grip on his tools and stepped forward, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew there was no turning back. The glowing tunnel stretched endlessly before them, the soft hum of the sanctuary growing louder with each step. Jacob's heart raced as he glanced at Lyra, her determined expression lit by the faint blue light. Behind them, Cale followed silently, his sharp gaze darting toward every shadow. The air grew heavier, thick with energy, as they approached a vast chamber. The walls were carved with intricate patterns, each glowing faintly. At the center stood a towering structure resembling the artifact, but far larger. It pulsed with a rhythmic light, as though alive. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "The heart of the sanctuary." Jacob set his tool bag down and scanned the room. "All right, what's the catch?" "There's always a catch." Lyra nodded solemnly. "The ancients built one final test to ensure only those worthy of their knowledge could access it. The artifact must communicate with the sanctuary to complete the activation. And what happens if it doesn't like what we're saying?" Jacob asked, half joking. "It will reject us," Lyra said, her tone grave. "And the consequences could be fatal." Jacob let out a breath, his nerves prickling. "Fantastic. Let's get started." Lyra approached the central structure and placed the artifact into a slot at its base. The moment it connected, the chamber erupted with light. Holographic projections filled the space, showing images of stars, ancient civilizations, and the ominous void Lyra had called the Devourer. The sanctuary emitted a deep, resonant voice, speaking in the ancients' language. Lyra stepped back, her expression tense. "It's asking for proof." "Proof of what?" Jacob asked. Lyra turned to him. "That we're capable of using their knowledge responsibly. That we have the wisdom to wield their power without destroying ourselves." Jacob frowned. "And how do we prove that? Write an essay? Solve a puzzle?" Before Lyra could answer, the projections shifted, forming a series of glowing symbols and shapes in the air. They'd moved in complex patterns, twisting and rearranging themselves. Jacob's brow furrowed as he studied them. "It's a logic sequence," he muttered. "A test of problem solving." Lyra looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. Jacob, you can do this. Humans are uniquely creative. That's why I chose you. Jacob sighed, stepping closer to the glowing symbols. No pressure, huh? He focused on the sequence, his mind working quickly. The symbols seemed random at first, but as he studied them, he began to see patterns, repetitions, connections, a rhythm. Slowly, he reached out and adjusted one of the shapes. The chamber responded with a soft hum, and the sequence shifted. Good, Lyra said, her voice steady. Keep going. As Jacob worked, the test grew more complex. The symbols moved faster, their patterns harder to decipher. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he adjusted each one, his fingers moving with a mix of instinct and logic. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he placed the last symbol in position. The chamber fell silent for a moment, the light dimming. Then, with a surge of energy, the central structure emitted a beam of light that filled the room. The holographic projection stabilized, showing a detailed star map and streams of ancient data. You did it, Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. Jacob stepped back, his chest heaving. That was the hardest puzzle I've ever solved. What happens now? The sanctuary's voice echoed again, this time softer, almost welcoming. Lyra turned to Jacob, a small smile on her lips. It's granting us access to the ancients' knowledge. Streams of data flowed into the artifact, its light glowing brighter than ever. Lyra retrieved it carefully, cradling it as though it were a precious treasure. Kale, who had been silent, finally spoke. You've proven yourself. But this knowledge comes with great responsibility. If misused, it won't be, Lyra said firmly. We'll use it to protect, not destroy. Jacob nodded. And to prepare. If that devourer thing is still out there, we'll need every advantage we can get. The three of them left the chamber, the artifact's light guiding their way. As they emerged from the sanctuary, the first rays of dawn painted the forest in gold. Jacob looked at Lyra and Kale, the weight of their journey settling in. This isn't the end, Jacob said. It's just the beginning. Lyra smiled, her confidence shining. Together, we'll face whatever comes. As the sanctuary faded behind them, its secrets now in their hands, Jacob knew their path wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, he felt ready to face the unknown.